Thank you, Paul, my friend. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I guess we're at the 5 o'clock hour, so there's coffee there if you want to get some coffee. But if you want something else, I'm not sure we can at this point. But anyway, so welcome. I want to say one thing first up, and then I'll explain to you what I mean. I want to tell you, if you're a blockchain person, you cannot ignore AI. And if you're an AI person, you cannot ignore blockchain, period. And I'll tell you why. So first, who am I? I'm a co-founder of the IWA. I serve on the board of the GBBC. Previously spent a very long time at Microsoft building tools, things like that. And about 25, 30 years ago, I did do my PhD work in AI long before AI was even in the mainstream media landscape. So I guess I could take some credit there. But firstly, if you're a blockchain person, you cannot ignore AI. Why? A few things. Firstly, you want to watch centralized AI make every single mistake that you've seen, and you're going to say, look, we have a better way of doing this at every step along the way. And second, if you're a blockchain person, you're going to say, look, you know, at the closed source, centralized AI, and you can say, look, this is not the future, this is the past. If you're an AI person, as you all, I'm sure you've seen the term trust everywhere, right? Trust is the big issue for AI. Why? Because if you ask people, they'll say, well, AI is a black box. How do I know what's going on inside? It goes deeper than the black box. The thing about AI is it is a bias amplification machine. Whatever bias you feed in gets amplified. The only way for AI to be able to get the term trust or trustworthiness is by exploiting blockchain capabilities, period. And so mark my words. So either way, you know, there is no choice. If you're working in the blockchain space, take the time to learn about AI and vice versa. So over the next maybe 10 minutes, I'll tell you a little bit about Gen AI. Folks here, you know, anybody who's very well versed in the domain of Gen AI? Any experts here? All right, I'll give you a brief primer on Gen AI. Yep. So AI, think of AI up until 2020, and then AI after in the last 3 years. So classic AI, let's call it classic AI. For about 50, 60 years, we're about machine learning primarily. Machine learning is about building systems to be able to look for patterns in data. It is statistics plus is machine learning. You look for patterns. So what is AI? I have an example I use. You know, they talk about a self-driving car, yeah? Well, we're not there yet, but if you think about the notion of a self-driving car, what does it do? It looks for images. You know, you see a pedestrian, you see a stop sign, you see, you know, some bystanders, and it very rapidly recognizes the pattern in the image and responds. It's a very fast loop of looking at something, recognizing it, and then responding. So you know, you go to the movies, you see the moving pictures, but we all know in the movies, you know, it's actually not moving. What you see is a set of frames, one by one, at high speed. That is the illusion of motion. The same way, classic AI was about using machine learning to be able to look for patterns, but do it so rapidly, so fluently, there was the illusion of intelligence. So when you go in a self-driving car, it's like watching a movie, but it's a different set of moving pictures, right? Classic AI. But 3 years ago, what happened was this. So the industry said, look, you know, we have these models. We've trained the models based on data to look for patterns. But we have so much data, so much compute capacity, we said, what if you could flip the model? Meaning, rather than saying, can you recognize a pattern, you say, can you create something? Because you have so much data in the model about the pattern, can you create something? So basically, you're flipping the model. And this is why you have these so-called hallucinations, right? You see stuff that's not correct. Why? Because we take a model and we are saying, create something for me. And it will, yeah? So this is the gist of Gen AI. So when we talk about AI, I think there should be some precision about, which AI are we talking about? It makes a big difference, by the way. Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes on this topic, which is, I believe, a critical issue for us. The first one is sort of open. What does open mean? We all know about open AI, right? So tell me, what is open about open AI? Anybody? What is open about open AI? Yes, sir. Okay, there we go. So it's not open. So what is open about open AI? Anybody? So the answer is no, not really. It's a very good marketing tagline, yeah? So it's a really powerful marketing tagline, but then we say, okay, what about open source? So we've all heard about open source models, yeah? I'm sure you've seen the media. So what is a good example of an open source model? Probably the one from Meta. It's called Llama 2. So there is a story behind this. So it was not a choice to make it open source. The weights of the network were leaked. And so Meta had no choice but to basically, cut their losses and say, okay, you know what? We will share the weights of the network. But remember, just being able to have the weights of the network does not make it possible for you and I to be able to reproduce the results of the so-called open source model. And there lies a crisis, I believe. Because if we have models, so-called open or even so-called open source models, and they're training on public data across the web. So obviously, as you can imagine, there are IP issues, which I'll ignore for now. That's for the lawyers to deal with, yeah? But think about it. When you scour the web and train these models, you find a variety of data across the spectrum. These are, for the most part, tainted models. And I believe we in the GBBC, and certainly across the broader blockchain ecosystem, we have a very unique role to play in truly enabling open source models for AI. Otherwise, we are in a place where there is no traceability. There is certainly no way to recreate the results. There is certainly no way to be able to trust any of the inferences. And there is no way to ascribe the actions to any upstream sources. Right? A complete true black box. If you're a regulator, you should be, staying up at night with this. If you're a policymaker, you should be asking yourself, how do we let this happen? If you're a blockchain person, you're going to say, look, we have a solution. We know how to do this. Right? So let me give you one more slide. Ideas like manifests, being able to say, well, what does the model actually comprise of? Ideas like lineage. What is the inheritance of the model? What is the version? What is the primary? What is the secondary? What is the so on? And lastly, but not the least, being able to say, okay, so what are the data sets you train the model on? Fundamentals, just the fundamentals. So lacking this, for us to be able to say AI is going to change the world, well, it is, but not in a way we might like it. Yeah. So I want to just make it a challenge for us here in the blockchain space, across the GBBC community, that we find ways to come together to be able to address this in a meaningful way, because we know how to do this. We have done this previously. We have so many lessons to share in terms of doing it the right way for the public good. And I want to pause right there and kind of just open up for questions, discussions. I have a couple more slides, but it's late in the evening, so I will just open up and, questions, comments, thoughts. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Constantine, and the question is, do you expect that AI, when it comes of age and is capable of programming, when AI is capable of programming much better than it does now, it will come and rewrite a lot of blockchain protocols in a better way? So a lot of money invested in these protocols will be up in vapor.
It's a really good question. So will AI be able to recreate protocols, maybe invent enhanced version of the protocols, yeah? So here's the way to think about it, right? So think about this inversion of the model to be able to create content. And content includes code. So where Gen AI works very well, very effectively, is in the small. When you say create small code snippets or small functions or maybe a couple of, absolutely, beautifully done, right? But when you say write me an essay, it will likely make up some citations. We've seen that. It will likely make up some comments that don't exist. So to answer your question, I believe coding is going to be a perfect sweet spot for Gen AI, not just for the creation, but for the debugging, for the maintenance, for the readability, for the documentation, all of it, I think is going to be very rapidly. Now, it doesn't mean that we stop writing or creating protocols, but those of us who are in the business of creating protocols are going to get so much better at this because we will use as a tool to make us far superior. That makes sense.
Well, is there danger to existing protocols and money invested in those?
Well, I would say the good news is we could use Gen AI to look for security violations, possible issues in terms of all kinds of capabilities around the existing code base. So being able to look at legacy code, being able to look at history, right, I think is a huge advantage. Is it a threat? So it's a very good question. So people say it's going to, is it going to take away jobs? Is it going to destroy the fabric? So initially, last year, my thought was that AI is going to be the great equalizer, the end of mediocrity, if you will, right? That there's going to be no space for mediocrity given AI's, presence ubiquitously. But what I've learned in the last 1 year is this. Those people who use AI as a tool to challenge themselves, to critique themselves, to be able to brainstorm, are doing so much better, exponentially better, versus those people who abdicate the work to the AI. What I mean is, if you say, look, write me a PowerPoint deck so I can give my boss, that job is going to be obsolete. But if you're the boss, you're going to say, look, I have no time. I want to be able to get this deck over the weekend, and I can use ChatGPT. You're going to be exponentially far ahead of the game. So in some sense, my view is it's not the end of mediocrity, it's the great divide. Because if the job involves abdication of critical reasoning, thought, I think that it's going to be in trouble. And this needs to be much more evangelized because we have to challenge young people to see this not as a way to save time or to do less work, but rather as a tool to make them better, to be creative, to challenge themselves, right? And I don't see it happening, unfortunately. It's not, yeah.
First of all, very well presented. My question is about when you had mentioned the AI training inputs being set on a blockchain and shared for, let's say, review. One of the things that blockchain has often had the challenge of is validating the data inputs. Yes. Same like AI, I would say. Problems. Right. So we have Oracle problems, and if we're taking AI as an Oracle to blockchain, as it relates to private companies that train their own AIs, my question is, do you have thoughts on an incentive model for these private companies? With your example of Facebook, right? The only reason they went open source with anything was... Exactly. So how can we incentivize that type of openness, no less on blockchain, but at all with these training models? And of course, leveraging blockchain would be conducive for sharing the validation of it.
It's a beautiful question, so I like it. I'll tell you a few things. So firstly, I don't want to sell what I'm building, but as I'm working on these so-called open source models, what I find is quite surprising. I find data sets across the dark web in these models. I find Trojan horses designed by not just by private actors, but certainly by geopolitical actors. Right? There's a whole host of things that we haven't really thought through in terms of security of these models. So to your question, talking about lineage, right? For me, the fundamental issue is, can we recreate the model? given what we know about the supposed sources, at a minimum, right? If we can't reproduce, then there is no value in the lineage or the manifest, yeah? But I think what you're saying is going well beyond the recreation, having an incentive model, I think is absolutely where we can really help power the AI community, because they don't have any economic architectures in their mind at all, right? Again, my point, we can't ignore them, they can't ignore us. Absolutely. Very good question. Thank you.
Perhaps question on this also. You mentioned putting the data, the training data on a blockchain. We all know that we need a lot of data for AI models to train, and that blockchains are not very good in handling a lot of data. Yes. How do you answer this?
So it's a very good question. So a couple of things here. One is having the lineage and the manifest of which data sets first, at a minimum. At least if we can know which sets were used for the pre-training, that's a huge step in the right direction. Second, you're right. These are not sets we can store on blockchain, but having some kind of a public repository and having cryptographic signatures for these at a minimum, I think is another big step in the right direction. You're right. We cannot store the data in the blockchain. It's going to be too much. But having at least the sources so we can academically reproduce, and secondly, another area where blockchain can hugely help AI is the cryptographic verification, the validation of these data sets. Did you actually use what you said you used? At a minimum, as a start. One more?
One more, yes. Yeah. In terms of yes. So in terms of understanding the information that is sitting on the blockchain, there's so much data and so many transactions. It's very hard for human to understand. Can you think of some models that can already now be deployed, and where I can talk to blockchain and think questions?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In fact, you could take any of the existing so-called open models and sort of let it run on your chain on the code, and it can give you very beautifully written documentation. It can do explainability. People talk about the other way. Can I explain the AI? But actually, AI can be used very beautifully to explain other things. Yeah. So almost at time, but just one last quick comment. I am trying to create some awareness of what I believe is a fundamental issue here. I believe as a community, we should do something around what I call the open model initiative. We cannot afford to let this continue. At some point, it's going to break in a very big way. And it's still early enough where the economic cost of doing it right is still possible. Another 18 months, it's going to be economically very, very significant where it's going to be past the point of no return. So with that, I want to thank you. Have a good evening.